And we are live.
Wonderful. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. And welcome to our international audience for another edition of Earth Day Live. We are so excited to have you join us today for this extremely distinguished panel. And as we celebrate International Women's Day, today we're going to be having another climate literacy edition of our webinar series to talk about how we can work as a global team to achieve great success with climate literacy. So today we will be having a feature of panelists from across Latin America to talk about what kinds of commitments we are seeing from countries across Latin America and how we can learn from examples of powerful women in leadership to achieve some of our environmental goals through climate literacy. So in just a moment, I will turn it over to our moderator. But again, thank you for joining today. Please throw some questions and comments in the chat features from whatever platform you are joining today, and we will be sure to reserve the last few minutes of our conversation to take questions from the audience. You'll also see a new feature today that if you are inspired by today's conversation and looking to support climate literacy and earthday.org's platform, you'll see a donate link there. So please consider donating to that link. So without further ado, we have some very rich conversation to get into today. So I'd love to introduce Dr. Miriam Villela from Earth Charter International, and she will be moderating our conversation today. Thank you so much, Miriam.
Thank you, Tracy, and thank you everybody for joining us. Really, let me start by expressing my admiration to each woman who are listening to us today for this special event. Special thanks for all those who are joining us in this conversation. Today is a day we can choose to remember and I would say celebrate women's achievement of the past and seek out ways to collaborate or ways to collaborative address the so many challenges of our current times we still have, although there are a lot of good achievements that we can remember. This morning, I woke up thinking about the context of our world 100 years ago and how women were living around that time. I, of course, started thinking about my grandmother, great grandmother, living in Brazil, and the struggles they had to face. I know that my grandmother and great grandmother were not leaders of social movements. They were not educated, but they were leaders and warriors in our family. And they continue to be incredible references for all our family. I would like to start by reflecting that around the time they were young, my great grandmother and was young, she and most women of her age had little access to education. Their challenge was not just a matter of not having access or the right to vote, that kind of, their challenge was not just summarized around not having the right to vote, which in Brazil, this was addressed in 1932. But imagine that during their time, 100 years ago, married women could only work outside home if their husband allowed. They were prevented from opening a simple bank account until their husband allowed. They were prevented from having a business establishment, so no businesswoman in those days, and they could not travel without the authorization of their husbands. This, of course, we know started to change with new policies, such as many new policies around Latin America and the world in the mid-60s and so on. But still, despite the fact that new policies emerged, there was still a struggle to change the mental models, the worldviews of men and women. Because despite the fact that the new policies were there, slowly coming in 1962 in Brazil and within, they were struggling to address the social pressure. So we all know that there is still a lot of education that is required to help us change our worldviews of men and women, not only around that time. With this, what I want to say is that processes of social change such as women rights and spaces, but also climate. Process of social change require a lot of awareness, a new kind of awareness, of a better way or new ways of looking at things. It requires also tireless work and collaboration and empowerment of those who seek change, to engage really in social movements. Then with luck, with awareness, new policies and law, there are some developments of new policies. Once we have all of them, we need to infuse that change into education. And I'm trying to draw a parallel here, of course, with women's issue and climate change issues. There are a lot of empowerment, social change, policies, but also change in the education is really required. Nowadays, we are in another stage of human history, not in the stage of my mother or great-grandmother. But we still have a lot of work to do to create an inclusive world for all, even though we have policies around that. Today is a good day for us to think about the struggles that are in the hands of our current generation. And as we think about the motto of the International Women's Day, which is choose to challenge. So I invite you to choose to challenge and call out gender bias and inequality, and think about the role women have in elevating the importance of education for climate change and climate literacy. So for today's event, Earth Day kindly invited a number of interesting speakers to share their views with us. The event is called Women in Leadership, Fighting the Climate Crisis Through Climate Literacy. And we have Marta Delgado, who is joining us from Mexico, Undersecretary of Global Affairs from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Mexico. Natalia Lever, who is joining us from Costa Rica, although she's also from Mexico. She's the Executive Director of the Climate Reality Project in Latin America. And Jose Luis Samaniego, who is joining us from Chile, I would say. He's the Director of Sustainable Development Division of ECLAC, the UN Economic Commission for Latin America. So let me start by asking you the first question. I would like first to invite Marta to address the question, and then we go to Natalia and Jose. In connection to, and the question is, in connection to the UN International Women's Day, can you share with us some reflections on your career? What has it meant for you to be a woman in leadership? And more specifically, in the environment movement, what has it meant to you as a woman? So first, let's listen from Marta and then Natalia.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Miriam Vela, Executive Director of the Earth Charter International. And also, I am very happy to join with Natalia Lever, the Executive Director of the Climate Reality Project for Mexico and Latin America, of Education of the Earth, with my colleague and friend, Jose Luis Samaniego. It is an honor to share this virtual gathering with you, and also be founded among such esteemed women leaders and activists in order to commemorate the International Women's Day. This date, it is an outstanding opportunity to underscore the importance of the women efforts and the multilateral and environmental agenda, particularly when it comes to climate literacy. So as former Minister for the Environment in Mexico City, where I was invited with to be a part of the local government of the government of the city, led by my current boss, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Marcelo Ebrard. I think that this is important to get conscience regarding the substantial value that the environmental education has as a driver for climate action, and to empower both present and future generations. Education is a key component to raise climate ambition. It is very well known that critical and committed societies that can demand the most determined climate policies from their governments, and those that actively push for a new social paradigm are based on environmental consciousness. So through the knowledge of the environment and the effects of the pollution, of the deterioration of the ecosystems, the societies will surely learn about climate change effects in our lives, but also about how we can prevent these impacts. So the day of the Earth Day, the Women's Day are very useful always to understand the social phenomena, but also the environmental challenges that we have right now. In this context, I want to highlight one of Mexico's most recent achievements. In the summer 2019, the Ministry of Education, with the previous approval of the Senate, initiated a reform to our third article of the Constitution in order to include sustainable development into a national curricula requirements. New reforms to secondary laws, namely the General Education Law, require that national education programs pursue the development of capacities on resource management, sustainable development, and of course, climate resilience. In terms of institutional training, the ministry has been keen on leading efforts to create awareness for the climate action empowerment agenda among relevant sectors, including the non-state actors such as local governments, civil society organizations, indigenous people, looking to advance mainstream climate education in policies and also other activities related. At this point, I would like to make a parenthesis on highlighting the challenges that we can call structural for women to exercise leadership, not only in the environmental field, but also in the general terms. The first concerns capacity building. Although women have higher levels of education, leadership tools are hardly taught, and women who possess them are compared to men always. So it is therefore important to invest in the development of leadership skills in women and girls. A second challenge concerns the elimination of gender stereotypes. Nor we are always able to develop any activity, including participating in economic and political life of our countries. So we must contribute to transform this situation by showing that women can and must be an essential actor in decision making. And that is a challenge for the region of Latin America and the Caribbean, but also for other countries around the world. Yet there is still a long way to mainstream climate education and training in our country's curricula. Hence, we must join our efforts to enhance innovation and partnerships in order to reach the most marginalized communities and also to empower vulnerable population, to include youth and girls and women in all the capacity building programs of our countries. Finally, I would like to conclude by emphasizing the fact that education is a social process that exceeds our schools' boundaries and responsibilities. Communities and adults have a huge impact on our children's learning and the early development of an environmental conscience. So the actions we take to stop environmental deterioration and to rescue Mother Earth will be paramount for the next generations. Therefore, we must address climate change by empowering individuals to act through knowledge and education so they can value our planet as our only home.
Thank you. Thank you, Marta. It's good to hear you. And I heard well the efforts of the Mexican government to infuse sustainable development in the curriculum and the ongoing efforts to include and mainstream climate literacy into education in Mexico. it's good also to hear the important role that, or leadership, I would say, you and the Mexican government is having in empowering the most vulnerable in the Mexican society in process of change. I would like now to call upon Natalia Lever to come and share with us any reflection you may have on your career, what it meant to be a woman in the current times.
Thank you, Miriam, and thank you for Earth Day for having me in this amazing panel. It's such an honor to be here with Marta Delgado and Jose Luis Samaniego, people that I admire a lot, and so it's an educational experience for me to be here sharing this space with them. And first, I would like to talk about what it has meant to me to work for the Climate Reality Project, because we are an educational organization. And what we do is we educate in innovative and creative ways. The whole movement of the Climate Reality Project started with a movie, with a documentary, and since then we have continued to educate and train activists and leaders across the world. And I'm proud to say that the majority of the leaders that we have trained are women. The majority of the people in my team are women. And just the way that we work and the values that we have, it's really interesting working in the environmental movement and with women that are so committed to work to protect our planet. And I think that that's one of the first things that comes to mind when thinking about what does it mean to being a woman and working in the environmental movement. Just connecting with your best self, and that is something that I share with a lot of women that I work with in the sector, and that includes your feminine and your masculine energy. Because we always talk about protecting and caring for others, but a lot of us also have this masculine energy of doing and making things happen. So I've seen women just being their best selves, but also men, just connecting with other values that maybe culturally are not as accepted. But with us leading them, I think not only the environmental movement is changing and becoming better, but also other aspects of society. So that is the first component. Then, and the second component is just leaders and mentors like Marta Delgado here, that she did the first project of bicycles, public bicycles, called Ecobici in Ciudad de Mexico, and right now it is an amazing project. Everybody uses them. A lot of other countries in Latin America have replicated the program, and it's changed people's lives. Like Cristiana Figueres, who was instrumental to signing the Paris Agreement, Wangari Maathai, the first African American woman to win a Nobel Prize, Lady Pech in Mexico, who has been instrumental for the caring of our natural resources and our bees. Even Greta Thunberg, this beautiful young woman who has moved millions of people across the world and who a lot of people consider a leader, a woman and a young leader. And I think that for me also, just my mentor, Beatriz Bujeda, she was the director of climate change in the Secretariat of Environment in Mexico, and she taught me what does it mean to be a woman in leadership. And as Marta was saying, these leadership skills, like what does it mean to be a woman and to be a leader, and this attitude of sharing with me everything she knew and respecting me and just making me believe that I could. I want to be that woman for others behind me, but yeah, just mentorship has been really important for me.
Thank you, Natalia. It's so nice to hear you and talking about mentorship, the importance of having women mentors, but also the important role that the Climate Reality Project has had in terms of education. And so many women in the leadership realm of the Climate Reality Project, which is a project that I admire a lot. Coincidentally, we have a lot of Earthshatter young leaders who have taken the Climate Reality course, and they're also climate reality leaders. So we share a lot that network of women or young leaders involved both in the Earthshatter International network of young leaders and the climate reality that I admire a great deal. Now, José Luis Samaniego, the head of CEPAL, the head of ECLAC, Alicia Bárcena, was actually my first mentor over 30 years ago when I worked under her. So she has, over the past over 30 years, been a wonderful Latin American leader in the UN realm, in the sustainable development, in ECLAC, in many ways. I would like to ask you, what does it mean for you to work with such a woman in that kind of leadership position, but also in all the other women around you in your personal life, in your professional life? What has it meant to you in terms of the role of women mainly in the environmental movement?
Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share ideas with you. Thank you to Earth Day for the invitation. And what I would say is it does really make a difference, and it has made a difference in my life. Alicia has been my boss now for 17 years. And I also had men bosses within CEPAL when I first arrived. And the trajectory that the institution has had, the emphasis on subjects, the liberty to explore issues that, as Natalia was saying, are related to the care of society, to the care of people, and to the care of the planet, has been enormous. And I don't think that without her leadership, CEPAL would be as relevant in these matters as it is. And she has taken the institution to a whole different level, to a much better level. But not only that, I mean, actually, I've been under a female direction for 27 years. And this, Martha and I know it clearly because we began more or less at the same time when we worked for the first Ministry of the Environment and its complementing institutions. Martha was way back then in the National Institute of Ecology, and I was in the Office of International Affairs with the first Minister of Environment in Mexico, who happened to be a woman, an academic woman, which, as Natalia describes, has these two yin and yang thing, which is very committed, very strong, hard-headed, very energetic, and at the same time, a careful, wonderful human being, Julia Carabias, who's still working for nature, still working for the Montes Azules Reserve, and still teaching generations at the National University on ecological restoration. So these two very strong women have occupied a big portion of my professional life, and I can tell you they've taken me to a place I wouldn't have imagined before. A much nicer place that I think I would be otherwise. I have to mention other colleagues along the way. For example, Martha and her female team in Foreign Affairs, which is very powerful. Claudia Sheinbaum, which occupied the same position as Martha at a different moment and is now the governor of Mexico City. And a little bit, as Natalia was saying, Cristiana Figueres made a huge leap forward in the way that the international policy and politics for climate change have been carried out. Let me tell you that before 2015, before COP21, mostly climate change had been gloom and doom. After COP21, climate change began focusing on positive solutions. So it brought a big change in the narrative in climate change. And of course, of the possibilities to educate and engage people in how to see climate change. Before, it was something to be very afraid of. After COP21 is an opportunity to live much better. And I think that in terms of the educational effort, the pedagogic effort, this positive narrative has a long way to yet go further. I'll leave it at that in this first question.
Thank you, Jose Luis. Thank you so much for highlighting that major change in COP21, change of narrative, and probably also the role of Cristiana Figueres behind that change of narrative in COP21. We would like now to shift to education. As we know, education has been included in climate agreements. We know that Article 12 of the Paris Agreement and Article 6 of the UNFCCC both are important articles that highlight, emphasize the importance of education, the importance of bringing climate education to different realms of education. But it's often a theme that is overlooked, maybe undermined, and not given really the priority that it requires. All around climate change discussions, policies, and when it comes to finances, education is hardly mentioned at all as a solution or as part of an important part of the strategy. In Costa Rica, there's a saying that reminds us that there is no chocolate without cacao. No hay cacao, no hay chocolate sin cacao. So I keep thinking about that saying, no hay chocolate sin cacao. There's no chocolate without cacao. When it comes to this, how can we envision having a new civilization, a more climate literate society, a more sustainable society without that cacao, without an education system that really takes it serious, the task of incorporating basic climate literacy and sustainable development elements throughout the stages of education. So it's already there. It's in the policies. It's in the international policy. However, it's not really taken to serious consideration within at the national and local level, and I would say not even within the UN sphere. So could you share with us any reflection you may have on this major challenge of why do you think climate change literacy, climate change education is undermined? Jose, shall we start with you?
Okay. Well, I think that the issue of the narrative, again, has a lot to do because you have to build the right story. If you, like when we spoke in the 60s and 70s about the nuclear menace, well, it really had very few positive things to tell aside from the access to electricity. In the case of climate change, also telling a story of the menace of global warming is not enough. I think that we have to choose a story that gives you the possibility of thinking how to improve this world, how to improve patterns of consumption and production and so on. And then you can build the new generations ready and anxious to explore this new world, which could be better in all fronts for the people, for the planet, and for the economy too. I think that to link the issue of gender and education, I think there's a big shortcoming in terms of statistics. And let me say why. Statistics seem to be very scientific. GDP seems to be a global consensus, very well established, but it has many questionable things. To start with, the fact that that GDP does not report the unpaid women in the economy, just because it's not a market transaction, makes it invisible. Since it's invisible, it's not important. The same as biodiversity. We do not have metrics that distinguish between men and women, for example, in the councils of renewable energy companies, in collective property on the land, on transportation businesses. So in terms of solutions, so far, women are statistically invisible in how they contribute presently and how they could be contributing even more in the future. So one roadblock is statistics. A second one is to choose a good narrative, a positive narrative, I would say. And the third is to start early on. In Mexico, we have the experience that the university programs, not necessarily the curricula, but the voluntary transdisciplinary programs tackled first on the issue of climate change and its possible solutions. It has been much slower to come into engineering, to come into economics, to go into basic secondary education, and much slower to go into primary education. So I think there's a way, an enormous way to go in terms of strengthening the curricula with a positive story that is supported by statistics, I would say.
Thank you so much. Natalia?
Thank you so much. And I agree with Jose that statistics and the data available that we have of solutions, we don't use it, we don't harness it sufficiently. There is a really interesting project, it's called the Drawdown Project. They do a peer review of the different solutions to climate change. And if you combine education for women and for girls with education, reproductive education, they become the most important solution to tackle climate change. And the thing is that climate and social systems are profoundly interconnected. And because we have these ideologies and a way we do things, and maybe we choose sides, we overlook scientific data that is already there available for us. So high quality and voluntary reproductive healthcare and high quality and inclusive education can be the single most powerful thing we can do to tackle climate change. Well, why? Because girls with higher education guarantee higher wages, upward mobility, so they can contribute to economic growth. It reduces maternal mortality, infant mortality. It creates lower conditions for health problems. They have more productive agricultural plots, and they have more nourished families. And as I was saying, these ability to choose whether and when to become pregnant. And even women across the world want these solutions, but they don't have access to contraception or to education. And even in countries with high incomes like the US, 45% of pregnancies are unintended. We know that with this pandemic, those numbers are going to come down, but we still have a population problem. And I do want to emphasize that honoring the dignity of women and children through family planning is not about governments forcing the birth rate down or up, depending on what is needed. And it's not about those in rich countries telling people in other countries to stop having children. When we focus on family planning with women's needs at the center, equality and well-being are the natural results, and we have these planetary co-benefits. And I think another very important feature is to educate in innovative ways, as Jose was saying with Cristiana Figueres. Now she has this beautiful new book. It's called The Future We Want. And it's a center of, okay, this is what we have done. And this is what we do at the Climate Reality Project as well. We talk about the truth. This is the truth. This is what's happening. And as truth as it is that we are in a very dangerous moment, it is also true that we have the solutions at hand. Scientifically, we have the technologies to do something about it. We have the man and woman power, and we have the political strength there. We have people in the government that do want to do the right thing, but now it's up to us as citizens to really harness that and to support the politicians that want to do the right thing. So education does need to come from the formal education systems, but also from one another. We need to use our individual voices and help others get educated and others get participating in the political arena, so that our governments can do more and can do better.
The non-formal education system, right? Thank you. So new education, more education for young girls, changing the narrative, as Jose said, and looking at metrics and making the invisible visible. Now, Marta, you have been so involved in policy making at the UN level, in the discussions around climate change. Why do you think climate change education is often undermined? And what could we do to raise the prominence, the importance of education as a way to address climate change?
Well, I believe that this approach has changed a lot. There has been an uplift to this matter under the UNFCCC. Today, more than ever, many countries are recognizing the power and the importance of education to fulfill the objectives of the Paris Agreement, and also to strengthen the convention itself. So let's make an example of this. The last conference of the parties in Madrid highlighted the action plan for gender equity, and in that negotiations, the education regarding climate change and public policies, where public policies making more inclusive the public participation and the confection of these policies were very embedded in the debate. So I think that education is a pillar of sustainability in all the matters that the green agenda are establishing. For example, the climate change is one, but not just the climate change. We can also think about the Biodiversity Convention, the Desertification Convention, and all the behaviors that society needs to change in order to become sustainable. I think that the problem is that the education and getting conscience to change our habits as individuals and societies is difficult, because it is a medium and long-term task. It is not immediate. And this also make me to think about how we could manage in a year a lot of changes in behavior. In a pandemic year, we change a lot our behaviors. We change our way of living. We change the way of society organize itself, and commerce and travels and everything. In a year, in one single year, we did it. And why climate change, which is also a thing that it is going to affect the globe and the planet, maybe in a worst manner as the pandemic did, we cannot change these behaviors and speed up the cultural change and the economic changes that we need to do in order to save the planet and also the humans that we are in the planet. So we have to think about what was the trigger for educational behavior to change in this pandemic, and try to bring these key elements to the climate changes that we need to, and cultural changes that we need to do for climate purposes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Marta. Indeed, this week marks one full year of the COVID pandemic that we are all going through and suffering in different ways and in different contexts around the world. For many of us, this has represented months of lockdown. And the question now to you, and I would like to start with Natalia. How has the pandemic impacted your work life? And do you feel it has impacted in the same way other male colleagues you have?
Thank you. Well, I think definitely what Marta was saying is really important, that we understand that we have changed, and we just changed. We are not talking about a historical, event. when we did this year. We changed a lot of our habits. So with commitment, we just can continue doing that to tackle climate change. And that is one of the ways that COVID has affected my work life and my team's work life. I think one of the first thing we did was to care for our mental health. That's something that we didn't have as present as we have now, because everyone is going through really difficult things with our families, our emotions, and we have a lot of work to do still. But we just put that at the center of our work. We tend to care for one another, and we tend to say, "Hey, you might be having a breakdown. Why don't you take a day off?" So that's definitely something that changed for us at the Climate Reality Project Latin America. But in general, definitely the pandemic has impacted women higher. In the US, they are even considering a national emergency, the rate in which women are abandoning the workforce. Women are losing jobs 4 times at a higher rate than men, because they were doing jobs, in restaurants, in hair salons, services that you need to be there to provide. And also because they are the ones who carry the burden of childcare and care for other family members that might be injured or that need help. And one thing that is worrisome is that, for example, in 2019, women outnumbered the men in the workforce. But in December 2020, the loss of jobs was attributed almost 100% to women job losses, according to the National Women's Center. So after this, or during this pandemic, we do need strong public policies to care for women in the workforce, like universal preschool, subsidized childcare, and paid family leaves. And we also need to create more resilient systems. And this happens with infrastructure, with just everything with climate change. We also need to build resilient systems for education. And what we do today, what we do now, can prevent COVID-19 to becoming a prolonged crisis for children around the world, and especially vulnerable children. The majority of the children and youth without access to internet to continue their education are from low-income families. We see large disparities in the last remote learning reachability report. We see that children in Africa are more impacted, but even within the countries, children that live in rural areas are more impacted with this educational and digital gap. We know that in Mexico, the states with lower internet accessibility for children and youth are Chiapas, Tabasco, Hidalgo, and Oaxaca. So we need to invest. We need to invest in closing that digital gap and ensuring that we can open up schools safely. And something that we also believe at the Climate Reality Project is the importance of nature-based education. It's not the same thing to learn something from a book that you go there and experience it yourself. And that's something that we have lost. And with this new normal, we can recuperate and use more. And also journalism. The media has an enormous role on educating the public, and that's why we work directly with media outlets. We train them and we help them to understand the connections between climate change and pandemics and migration and so on. So we have a lot of tools at our hands. We just need to become more involved.
Thank you, Natalia. Marta Delgado, what do you think, or how do you think the COVID pandemic impacted women in the workforce?
Unfortunately, very much, because women are in a vulnerable situation without pandemic. We have worked in the world is that we be for example, the domestic violence is increased by the confinement. The loss of women's job have increased also, and all the care system are relying on women. All the nurses, all the kids are in the houses, having classes by the computers and the Zooms sessions, but the mothers and the grandmothers are taking care of them in house. Of course, the ill people and elderly also are relying on women for their care. So we have to think how this is a very huge impact in the way of living of women around the world, how many years we are retroceding because of this situation, and what we need to establish as public policies in order to relieve the big weight that women are having due to the pandemic right now. I think that the pandemic shown the vulnerability of the situation, economically and socially speaking, of women, and we have the opportunity to realize that this situation can occur again in the near future, and maybe in a lower intensity. It was occurring in the societies, but the pandemic shown how severe is this vulnerability of women.
Okay, thank you, Marta. I would like to shift our conversation to COP26, and it's one of the questions it seems that we received from the audience too. So COP26 is happening soon. What do you think? Maybe let's start with Jose Luis. What do you think about COP26, and what commitments can we envision in terms of education and climate literacy in the realm of COP26? What do you think could be our expected outcomes?
Well, before I get into the subject proper, I would invite all our audience to take a look at the social panorama that was published last week, 2020, by ECLAC-CEPAL, where much of what Martha and Nathalie have been saying about the disproportionate impact on women and the reasons for that disproportionate impact is documented. It has numbers, country by country. Now, going to the question, I think there are several things that can be hoped for and worked for COP26. Let me start by pointing out a good practice that Mexico Foreign Affairs has established, and we've seen it in practice, and we've seen the results of that. Martha has allowed for women from civil society to participate in their delegations, and even to assume leading some leading negotiations. For example, the gender negotiation. It was done jointly by people from the ministry and with civil society. If we had more countries establishing a policy of parity within their delegations and deliberately bringing women from gender organizations, we would be in a different moment in the COP. Let's remind ourselves that the UNFCCC was one of the worst performing Rio conventions in terms of addressing gender issues. While the CBD, the Desertification Convention, had a gender approach, the UNFCCC, energy, man against nature, it had nothing. It took many years to develop a gender policy within the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. So a good practice by delegations to include women as delegates and to include social organizations that represent women's interests is key to change the discussion. Martha was saying a big achievement in COP25 was to have a gender program, but it is not funded. So another step would be to get the funding for that program and to instruct the funding agencies such as the GF, the Green Climate Fund, the Adaptation Fund, to allocate a certain percentage to projects that have a gender approach. In reports that are delivered to the convention, they're gender blind. We don't know how many women participate in the solutions. We don't know how many women we have in the countries working on the climate change issues. And the reports could be gender sensitive to start breaking this invisibility I was mentioning before. And finally, I would say that we have been in this negotiation since 1992. These last 30 years have been the most intense in terms of emissions, like if the convention was not there. But I'm certain that if we had started out educating people at secondary level and university level, we would have many more economists, engineers, physicists, chemists, educators, teachers, whatever, working in favor of climate change action.
Thank you so much. I think we all agree. I could see the faces. We all will join you fully on that. Had we invested more in a new kind of education, an education that can reflect the concerns that are written in policies, but reflected truly and seriously in education, probably the result over the past 30 years would be different. Natalia, what do you think could we expect as outcomes for COP26, especially when it comes to maybe climate literacy?
Yeah, thank you. And I first I just want to comment on that point of the importance of accompanying policy with education, and because policy is very slow because of its nature, and education it's a long-term result as well. So we do need to focus on just at the national and even subnational levels, how to incorporate educational pieces for our efforts to climate change. And yes, this may be coming from the international law, but we just need to do a better job nationally on how do we incorporate environmental education. As Marta was saying at the beginning, the Mexican government is doing it right now, and as civil society, we just need to push it forward, just outside the policy aspect. Now for COP26, I think that, as Jose was saying, the final piece is the finance piece is going to be central. And how do we measure? Who measures? Who has to invest and when? And those are the things that in COP25 really were responsible for us not getting a good result. So we just need to do a better job of informing partners and parties on who's going to invest and who's going to measure. Because I mean, that's basically what's missing at this point. We have all the other things a little bit pinned down, but we need a way to finance them. And just as other human rights measures, we just need to put gender issues in the measurements of results, as Jose was saying. And for me, just generally, we need to move from the indices into a carbon neutrality approach. Just, we have a carbon budget and we are burning it faster than we thought we would. So now 110 countries have made commitments to carbon neutrality by 2050, and hopefully we are going to move there faster with what we can achieve in COP26 on the finance side.
Thank you, Natalia. Marta Delgado, who have been so involved in these negotiations, in terms of COP26, what do you think are the commitments we could envision when it comes to education and climate literacy?
Well, you might be aware, 2020 marks the end of the Doha Work Program. On this regard, we have participated in informal meetings to determine the future of this agenda, which is so crucial right now for the effective implementation of the convention and also for the Paris Agreement. This decision will be adopted in the next conference of the parties. So, of course, we have a kind of urgency for all the parties to participate in this meeting and even more to proceed virtually with the negotiations. I think that we have to take advantage of the current technological access to continue the negotiations. And finally, I think that with the United States coming back to the Paris Agreement, the negotiations are going to be rebusted. We have to think on how to increase the ambitions. It is very well known that in Mexico, for example, we are sticking on the Paris Agreement commitments that we ratified, and also we presented our national determined contributions last December 2020. But right now we can find some inspiration and some new spirit on recovering this spirit of getting more ambitious targets for any country. In Mexico, we are thinking on how to increase the level of ambition of our own agreement, our own commitment. But the discussions this year are going to be very important, not just in the 22nd of April that the United States are reconvening to really get re-engaged in the Paris Agreement, but also in September during the Assembly of the UN, and finally in Glasgow in the COP. We have those opportunities to get re-engaged, and also with these two countries, United States and also China, with good future perspectives. So I really am excited about this new era of the negotiations, and I hope Mexico can be in the same level of ambition of every country are getting right now. I want to apologize because I have to leave right now to another meeting, which is going to start at 11 o'clock, at 1 o'clock here in Mexico. But I want to thank you for the invitation, and thank you for inviting us to be part of this important panel.
Thank you, Marta, and thank you, Natalia.
Gracias.
And Jose Luis. Thank you for coming. I'm going to invite Tracy to come to the floor, close this session, but also with a question to you. Briefly, as we know, US is rejoining the Paris Agreement. The Biden Climate Summit is happening during Earth Day in a month and a half, more or less, from now. What do you think could be the opportunities, and how can we all work with the opportunity of having the US taking a new role?
Absolutely.
Tracy.
First of all, thank you so much to this amazing, distinguished, powerful, inspirational panel. The chatter in the discussions has been rich and innovative. So we're so excited about the conversations that are happening. And that's exactly what we were hoping for, is that yes, education is a long-term solution, but it is urgent and it is critical to put it into place now. So having these conversations with your community members, with your local school board officials, and with your elected officials, find out who's going to be your representative at the COP meeting in Glasgow in November. Find out if your country is represented at the Biden Summit on April 22nd, Earth Day. It's the perfect day to be talking about these commitments and these conversations. Earth Day and this presidential summit of global leaders talking about their commitments to education is the perfect pre-COP to talk about how we're going to address these issues. And again, we couldn't agree more that education is a crucial and urgent piece to start embedding into across that. And that is really the point of our climate literacy campaign. So we're so fortunate to have partners like you all supporting that campaign. We are over 450 global signatories at this point of organizations around the world that agree that this is critical, that we embed climate and environmental education across disciplines, across grade levels, to really support our youth and make sure that they have equal access to this education. So thank you so much for this panel and for these conversations. We have big ambitions, but it is possible because of entities like you across Latin America and across the world who are making this issue the forefront of our climate crisis and how we educate youth to do so. So thank you everyone for joining another edition of Earth Day Live. We are so grateful for you to join us today. And our Miriam, thank you for moderating such an elegant and eloquent discussion today. And Natalia and Jose Luis, thank you so much for your input, your expertise, and your passions today. And thank you everyone for joining again. Please stay tuned to our website. Earth Day is just over a month away, so please stay tuned for April 22nd and all the events that will be happening to make sure that climate literacy is part of our everyday lives. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.